The morning sun rose over Chennai, with a soft golden glow. The streets slowly filled with the sounds of bicycles, the calls of street vendors, and the scent of jasmine drifting through open windows. It was an ordinary day for most people, but in a modest house tucked between two narrow lanes, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Lakshmi Pichai woke up before dawn, just as she always did. Her old alarm clock rang at 5, and she reached out with her thin, wrinkled hand to turn it off. She sat up slowly, her knees aching with the weight of the years. She looked at the framed photo on the small table beside her bed. It was a picture of her son, Sundar, standing in front of a blackboard. He was only 10 in that photo, holding a book in one hand and a pencil in the other. Smiling shyly at the camera, Lakshmi whispered softly, "My boy, you are the light of my life." She got up, folded her blanket, and walked to the kitchen to make tea. She liked her tea with ginger, just the way her husband had liked it before he passed away many years ago. As the water boiled, she looked at the calendar on the wall. The date was marked in red ink. She had circled it weeks ago. Today was important. In Delhi, far from Chennai, preparations were being made for a major event. The Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, was set to address a group of students and professionals at the National Technology Summit. It was a special occasion. Leaders, scientists, and inventors from all over the country were attending. The guest of honor was none other than Sundar Pichai, CEO of one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. The media was already buzzing. Headlines flashed across TV screens. Modi to speak alongside Sundar Pichai at National Summit. Reporters crowded the venue. Cameras were being tested. Microphones were checked again and again. Everyone wanted to witness the moment two great minds met on stage. But what nobody expected was that the focus of the day would shift entirely to a quiet woman in Chennai, who had never once appeared on television, as Sundar boarded his flight. From California to India 2 days earlier, his heart felt heavy. He had traveled the world, spoken to global leaders, and led innovation. But this trip was different. It was not about launching a product or attending a conference. It was about something deeper, something personal. He had received a call from a senior government official. "The Prime Minister wants to speak about your mother," the voice said. Sundar had paused. "My mother?" "Yes," the voice replied. "He believes her story needs to be told, and he wants to tell it himself." Sundar had not known what to say. He simply nodded, even though the person on the other end could not see him now. As he sat in the airplane, looking out of the window at the clouds passing by, memories came rushing back. He remembered the evenings when he would sit on the floor, while his mother worked long hours stitching clothes. She would hum old songs as she sewed, never once complaining, never once asking for anything. He remembered how she saved every rupee, how she skipped meals sometimes so he could have milk, how she walked miles to find the right school for him. Her hands were always tired, but her eyes were always bright with hope. Back in Chennai, Lakshmi poured tea into a small steel cup. Her neighbor Mala knocked on the door and stepped inside without waiting. "You are up early," Mala said. Lakshmi smiled. "As always." Mala looked at her curiously. "Do you know your son is coming to Delhi?" Lakshmi nodded. "He told me. He has some work there." Mala sat down on the wooden stool. "They say he will meet the Prime Minister. Imagine that." Lakshmi stirred her tea and said nothing. Mala added, "You must be proud." Lakshmi looked out of the window. Her voice was soft. "I am proud of the man he has become, but I miss the boy who once held my hand tightly when crossing the street." Later that day, in Delhi, the National Summit began. The grand auditorium was filled with people. The energy was electric. When Narendra Modi entered, everyone stood. When Sundar Pichai followed, applause filled the room. People held their phones up, trying to capture the historic moment. But what happened next was completely unexpected. After welcoming everyone, the Prime Minister stepped forward and said, "Today, I want to begin not by speaking about technology, but by speaking about the power of a mother's sacrifice. There was silence in the room. Modi continued, "We talk about visionaries, we talk about innovation, and we talk about leadership. But behind every leader, there is a story of pain, perseverance, and unseen sacrifice." He paused and looked toward Sundar. "Today, I want to thank someone who is not on this stage, someone who stayed behind the curtain her entire life, someone who gave her son wings without asking for anything in return." The screen behind him lit up with a photo. It was a photo of Lakshmi Pichai sitting on a small stool, sewing clothes, her eyes focused, her lips pressed together. Gasps filled the room. Sundar looked up and saw his mother's image on the giant screen. His hands began to shake. Modi spoke. Again. This woman, Lakshmi Pichai, lived in a small home. She raised a boy who would go on to lead one of the most powerful companies in the world. But she never once asked for recognition. She only asked that her son follow his dreams. Tears welled in Sundar's eyes. He tried to speak, but no words came. His lips trembled. He bowed his head. The Prime Minister walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are here today because she stayed strong when things were hard. She did not give up, and that is true leadership." The audience rose in standing ovation. Many had tears in their eyes. In that moment, Sundar could only think of one thing. He wanted to go home. He wanted to hug his mother. He wanted to tell her what she had always known, that everything he had, he owed to her. Meanwhile, in Chennai, Lakshmi sat on her old wooden chair, unaware that her name had just been spoken by the most powerful man in the country. She turned the radio on, as she always did at that hour. The voice of the news anchor came through, shaking with emotion. The Prime Minister just thanked Lakshmi Pichai in front of the entire nation. Sundar Pichai stood silent, overcome with emotion. Lakshmi's hand trembled. Her teacup slipped and fell to the floor, but she did not hear it break. She closed her eyes. A single tear ran down her cheek. She whispered, "He remembered." And far away, in the crowd, Sundar closed his eyes too, feeling the warmth of her voice in his heart. Even though she was not there, that was only the beginning. Something bigger was coming. Something that would change both their lives forever, but neither of them knew it yet. The plane landed in Chennai just after midnight. The air was thick with humidity, and the city was sleeping under a blanket of stillness. Sundar Pichai stepped out of the airport wearing a simple white shirt and jeans. He had declined the official car sent for him. Instead, he asked for an old auto rickshaw. The driver, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache, did not recognize him at first. "Ananuga," Sundar said softly. The driver nodded. "Yes, sir, hop in." As the auto rolled through the quiet streets, Sundar looked around. Every turn brought a memory. Every shop front held a piece of his past. The tea stall where he once bought his mother a hot drink on rainy days. The small bookstore where he read about machines he had never touched. The park where his father once promised him, "One day, you will build things that will change lives." But tonight, all Sundar wanted was to see his mother. When the auto reached his old home, he stepped out and stared at the building. It was still the same, faded paint, rusted gate. The small tulsi plant near the entrance still stood in the clay pot his mother had placed. Many years ago, he rang the bell. Inside, Lakshmi had just woken from a light sleep. Her heart had been restless since the summit. Though she had heard the news, she had not yet spoken to her son. She had not called him. She waited. Something told her he would come. When she opened the door and saw him standing there, she did not speak. She just reached out and touched his face. He took her hand and kissed it gently. "Amma," he whispered. She stepped aside, and he entered. The house smelled the same. Jasmine and sandalwood. The walls were filled with old memories. His childhood drawings. A broken clock that still hung in the corner. The photo of his father, smiling faintly from the wooden frame. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Lakshmi said, You look tired. Sundar smiled. I am. Do you want tea? He shook his head. I just want to sit here, with you. She nodded and placed her hand on his. I heard everything. Sundar looked away, tears threatening again. I didn't know he would do that. I was not ready. Lakshmi's voice was calm. You don't have to be ready to feel proud. He looked at her. I didn't thank you enough. You don't have to, but I want to, he said. I never told you how your struggle gave me strength, how your silence taught me focus, how your sacrifices built my future. Lakshmi smiled. A mother does not count what she gives. She just gives. He sat back, his heart heavy. When he showed your photo on that screen, everything else disappeared. I felt small, not because I was weak, but because I had taken so long to understand your greatness. She touched his hair gently. You came back? That is enough. Meanwhile, in Delhi, the media storm had begun. News channels replayed the speech, again and again. Anchors used words like historic, emotional, and unforgettable. Articles flooded social media. People from every corner of the country began searching her name. Who is Lakshmi Pichai? They asked. The answer was not found in databases or interviews. It was found in the simplicity of her life. She was the woman who washed dishes with sore hands so her son could go to school. She was the mother who told him, read, even when the light is dim. She was the one who taught him, never step on someone to climb up. And now, her story had found its way into the hearts of millions. But not everyone was pleased. Behind closed doors, some political figures murmured, why her? What is so special about a tailor's widow? Others whispered, this is just a show. It will pass. But Modi had a different thought. Later that evening, he called his team and said, we will not let this story fade. We must find a way to show the people that greatness does not come from wealth. It comes from values. He ordered a team to prepare a special feature on mothers like Lakshmi, women who had never seen the inside of an office, but had shaped the future of the country through their children. Back in Chennai, Sundar woke up early the next morning. He made tea for his mother, just the way she liked it. You didn't forget, she said, surprised. He laughed. How could I? They sat together on the small balcony. The sky was a pale pink. The city was waking up. Birds chirped softly. Lakshmi said, I don't understand why everyone is talking about me. Sundar looked at her. Because they finally see what I have always seen. I don't want attention, she said. You don't need it. But others need to hear your story. It will give them strength. She thought for a moment. Then tell them this. Tell them that every child carries the dreams of their parents, and every parent carries the weight of their child's future. Sundar nodded. I will. But there was something else stirring in the shadows. A man named Ramesh, an old classmate of Sundar, saw the news. He had once failed in business and blamed others. He had lived with bitterness for years. When he saw Sundar's name everywhere, jealousy grew in his heart. He was nothing special, Ramesh said aloud. Just lucky. His anger turned to obsession. He began digging into Sundar's past, looking for something to bring him down. He didn't understand that this story was not built on secrets or shortcuts. It was built on struggle, and struggle leaves no space for shame. Meanwhile, Modi's team contacted Sundar. Sir, the voice said, the Prime Minister wants to visit Chennai next week. He wants to meet your mother in person. Sundar was stunned. He wants to come here, to this house. Yes, sir, he said. It's time the nation sees where true inspiration lives. When he told Lakshmi, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, I don't know how to prepare for that. Sundar smiled. Just be yourself. That's all he wants. But deep inside, something in Lakshmi began to shift. She had always been strong in private, but now she would need to be strong in public, and that she had never done before. The world was changing around her, and the moment was coming when she would need to stand not just as Sundar's mother, but as a symbol of quiet strength for an entire nation. The news spread like wildfire. Whispers turned into loud chatter. People rushed from door to door, asking the same question again and again. Is it true? Is the Prime Minister really coming to Annanagar? In less than a day, Lakshmi Pichai's small, quiet neighborhood transformed into something no one had ever seen before. Workers arrived early in the morning to fix potholes that had been ignored for years. Painters touched up the walls of nearby houses. Electricians replaced old streetlights. Security teams checked every alley and every roof. Children peeked through windows with wide eyes, and elders gathered under trees with folded hands and puzzled faces. Inside her house, Lakshmi sat still on her chair, looking out through the iron grill of her window. Her heart beat slower than usual. She had always been a woman of peace. Noise had never been her friend, but now the whole world seemed to be outside her gate. Sundar walked into the kitchen, where she was slicing onions for lunch. "Amma," he said gently, "you don't have to cook today. They're sending people to take care of everything." Lakshmi didn't look up. "They won't know how much chili you like." He smiled. "You still remember?" She glanced at him. "I may forget my age, but I'll never forget my child's taste." He watched her quietly, admiring the way her hands moved, steady and focused, as they had always been. They never trembled, even in the worst days. They were the hands that held his when he cried after being bullied at school. The hands that wiped his face when he had a fever. The hands that stitched buttons late into the night so he could go to school in a clean shirt. Now, those same hands were cooking for the Prime Minister of India. As the sun climbed higher, the neighborhood filled with vehicles and press vans. News reporters stood near the entrance of the lane, holding microphones, talking into cameras. This is the first time in recent history that a sitting prime minister is visiting a private home without political reason. One of them said. Another added, "The story of Lakshmi Pichai has captured the hearts of millions." People held their phones up, taking pictures and videos. The street buzzed with excitement. Young volunteers were stationed near the entrance, making sure the crowd didn't push past the barricades. Then, without warning, a convoy of black cars appeared at the end of the street. It moved slowly, respectfully, through the narrow lane. Everyone fell silent. Lakshmi stood at the doorway, wearing a simple cream-colored sari with a green border. Her hair was tied in a bun, and her eyes were steady. Beside her stood Sundar, wearing a plain kurta. He had insisted on no formal clothing, no grand stage, and no red carpet. Modi stepped out of the car with folded hands. His face was calm, and his eyes carried warmth. He walked toward Lakshmi slowly, and when he reached her, he bowed slightly. "Namaste," he said. "Lakshm." I returned the gesture. "Namaste." He looked around the small yard, then at the house. "This is more beautiful than any office I have visited." Lakshmi smiled faintly. "It is not much." Modi shook his head. "It is everything." They walked inside. Cameras were not allowed past the gate. Sundar had asked for privacy, and Modi had agreed. Inside, the walls carried stories, not paint. Every crack was a memory. Every faded corner had a voice. The Prime Minister sat on a wooden chair across from Lakshmi. Sundar stood nearby, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Modi began. "I've met presidents, kings, and billionaires. But today I feel I am sitting with someone greater." Lakshmi said softly, "I am just a mother. And that," Modi said firmly, "is the highest role one can have." Sundar turned away to hide the tears forming in his eyes. The conversation continued for half an hour. They spoke about education, hardship, and values. Lakshmi did not complain about the past. She did not boast about her sacrifices. She only said one thing that struck deeply. "The world looks at what my son became, but I always looked at who he was becoming." Outside, the crowd waited patiently. Some held flowers, Some carried sketches of Lakshmi. One girl held a board that said, "Thank you for raising our hero." Meanwhile, inside, Modi stood up. He looked at Sundar. "You carry your mother's strength in your silence. Do not lose that." Then he turned to Lakshmi. "May I touch your feet?" Lakshmi looked shocked. "Please don't. I am just—" But before she could finish, the Prime Minister bent down and touched her feet. Outside, Sundar's hands covered his face. Emotion poured from his eyes. He had never imagined this moment. He had seen honor. He had seen awards. But never something so humble and real. The door opened, and the Prime Minister walked out. The media ran forward, but he raised his hand. "Today, I met the soul of India," he said. "And her name is Lakshmi Pichai." The crowd clapped. Tears flowed freely. It was no longer just a visit. It was a lesson. The convoy left as quietly as it had arrived. Sundar walked his mother inside again, helping her sit down. "Was it too much?" he asked. Lakshmi nodded slowly. "It was more than I ever expected." As night fell, the house became quiet once more. Lakshmi looked at Sundar and said, "This honor is not mine alone. It belongs to every mother who gave everything and asked for nothing." He sat beside her. "What happens now?" she said. "We rest, and tomorrow, we begin again." But while they rested, the country did not sleep. Thousands of letters began arriving. Handwritten notes from children, emails from mothers, photos of families holding candles in her honor. Schools added her name in lesson plans. A movement began online with the tag, "Thank you Lakshmi." In small towns and big cities, people began sharing stories of their own mothers, women who worked as cooks, laborers, nurses, and maids who had silently changed the lives of their children. And somewhere in that wave of gratitude, change began. But not all eyes were filled with admiration. Ramesh, Sundar's jealous classmate, sat in a dark room, his face cold. He stared at his computer screen, watching the video of Modi touching Lakshmi's feet. "Enough," he muttered. "This has gone too far." His hands moved quickly on the keyboard. He opened old files, scanned through records, searching for anything, any piece of dirt, any forgotten secret, anything that could bring Sundar down. He smiled darkly. "Let's see how perfect you really are." Outside, the stars shone brightly, but in the shadows, a storm was beginning to form, and the peace of the moment would soon be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The next morning, Sundar and Lakshmi sat in their small living room, sipping tea. The light poured through the window, and birds chirped gently outside. It felt peaceful again, almost as if the world had returned to silence. But something was different. Sundar felt it. His mother's name was no longer just known in their lane. Now, it echoed across the nation. Lakshmi handed him a bowl of idealists and said softly, "People have started sending food, flowers, letters. I don't know what to do with all this." Sundar looked at the growing pile near the doorway. Boxes of sweets, framed poems, hand-stitched towels with her name on them. The nation was not only thanking her, it was trying to touch her in return. He smiled. "They just want to show love." Lakshmi nodded. "I know, but I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of being seen too much. When light falls on you, so do shadows." Those words lingered with him longer than she realized, while the world clapped. In a quiet cafe on the other side of Chennai, Ramesh sat hunched over his laptop. His face was tense. His fingers tapped the keys quickly. He wasn't satisfied with watching from the sidelines anymore. He felt left behind. Years ago, he had sat in the same classroom as Sundar. He had even topped a few exams, but life had taken them on different roads. Sundar went forward. Ramesh felt like he had been left behind in dust. He opened old school records. He searched for financial documents. He scanned forums, trying to find someone who had a bitter word about Sundar. Anything, something small he could twist into scandal. Then he found something, An old company document from years ago, when Sundar had first started working in the tech world. The document showed a decision made during a product rollout that had failed in its first version. It wasn't a crime. It wasn't illegal. But Ramesh knew the internet didn't care about facts. It cared about headlines. He wrote a blog post with a dramatic title, "The Side of Sundar Pichai the World Doesn't Know." He posted it and paid money to push it on social media. The blog spread like wildfire. People began sharing it. Hashtags appeared. News channels started asking questions. Interviews were replayed with a new tone. Doubt was being planted. In Chennai, Lakshmi noticed at first. A young man who had come to deliver a package didn't look her in the eye. A woman from the neighborhood stopped her and asked, "Is it true what they're saying about Sundar?" Lakshmi didn't know what to say. Sundar returned home from a short visit to a local school. His face was pale. He looked tired. She asked, "What's happening?" He sat down and said quietly, "Someone is trying to ruin my name. They're saying I lead in business, that I covered mistakes." She looked at him deeply. "Did you?" "No," he replied. "But mistakes did happen. I was young. I took decisions that didn't always work. But I never cheated anyone." Lakshmi took a deep breath. "Then do not run." He looked at her. "What should I do?" "Tell the truth. In your voice. Not through press. Not through lawyers. Through your own words." The next day Sundar posted a short video. No music. No background. Just his face. He said, "I started with nothing. I made mistakes. I was not always right. But I have never hidden from the truth. And I will not start now." He ended with, "Judge me for my choices, not for someone else's jealousy." The video went viral in minutes, but even more powerful was what followed. Lakshmi was invited to speak at a gathering of mothers hosted by a local college. She had never spoken in front of strangers before. Her hands trembled as she stood at the microphone. She looked at the crowd and said, "My son is not perfect, no child is. But I raised him to be honest, not flawless, to be kind, not loud. And I will stand beside him, not behind him." The crowd erupted in applause. The journalist recorded the moment and shared it with the caption, "A mother's voice cuts through noise." As praise returned, so did the attacks. Ramesh became bolder. He started appearing on news panels. "I knew Sundar in school," he said. "He was always praised too much. Now look at what's coming out." But others began to question his motives. Journalists visited their old school. She interviewed teachers. All of them praised Sundar's focus, his humility, his silence in the classroom. She asked about Ramesh. One teacher said, "He was smart, but he often tried to compete with Sundar in unhealthy ways." The tide turned again. Ramesh's bitterness became clear. People stopped listening. Sundar chose not to respond further. Instead, he focused on something else. A quiet plan he had been building in his heart since he landed in Chennai. He sat with his mother one evening and said, "Oma, I want to build something in your name." She looked surprised. "What kind of thing?" "A school," he said. "Not a big building, but a place where children with dreams can study, even if they have nothing." She was silent. "I'll call it Lakshmi Values School," he said. She turned away, wiping her eyes with her sari. "What is wrong?" he asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. It's just that when I gave you my last gold chain for your school books, I thought it was the end of my giving. Now I see it was only the beginning." Soon, news of the school spread. People from across India sent donations. Volunteers signed up. Architects offered to design. Teachers came forward to serve. But one challenge remained. The land where Sundar wanted to build had been caught in a long legal dispute. Powerful people claimed it was not meant for construction. One of those people was related to Ramesh. He used his influence to block the approval. "I will not let him turn this into a show," he said. "Enough of this fake kindness." Lakshmi heard about the delay. She stood outside the gate of the office handling the approval papers. No media followed her. No bodyguards walked beside her. She went alone. Inside she met the officer in charge and said, "I came with empty hands. But I carry something stronger. Truth. Let children have a place to dream. That is all we ask." The officer looked at her, his eyes filled with respect. He nodded. 2 days later, the approval came through. The school construction began. As the first brick was laid, Sundar stood beside his mother. A group of children sang a small prayer. The sun was high, and the breeze carried hope. Lakshmi whispered to Sundar, "Now I am not afraid of the light anymore." He took her hand, "Because you became the light." But just as peace was settling in, a letter arrived. No name on the envelope, just one line inside, "This is not over." The letter was made of thick, old paper. There was no return address, no stamp, and no name on the envelope. Sundar held it in his hand and stared at it for a long time. The handwriting was shaky, almost like someone had written it in a hurry, or with trembling fingers. He opened it slowly. The words inside were simple, but heavy. "This is not over." That was it. No threat, no explanation, just a cold sentence. He showed it to Lakshmi after dinner. They sat at the table, the fan spinning slowly above them. She read the letter and placed it on the table. "People who write in the dark never come into the light." Sundar nodded. "But it means someone is still watching, still trying." Lakshmi looked calm. Truth has no fear of eyes, only lies do. Outside, the foundation of the school was growing. Construction workers dug into the earth with steel tools. Bricks were being stacked. Children came every day to watch with wide eyes, holding notebooks, already dreaming of lessons they would learn there. But behind the smiles, Sundar felt unease. Not fear, just a quiet disturbance in the air. Ramesh had gone silent since his last appearance on TV. No tweets, no blogs, no interviews. No one had seen him in person. Some thought he had accepted defeat. Others thought he was planning something else. Meanwhile, Sundar started traveling across the country, meeting with teachers, speaking at youth forums, and promoting the message behind the school. Every child deserves a chance, no matter how little they have. He refused bodyguards. He refused grand events. Instead, he walked into classrooms unannounced, sat with children, and asked them about their lives. Some cried, some laughed. All of them listened. One day, in a small school in Rajasthan, a girl stood up and asked, "Sir, what made you strong when things went wrong?" He paused. Then he said, "My mother did not say, 'Be strong.' She showed me how." Back in Lakshmi continued to live simply. She cooked her meals, watered her tulsi plant, and helped the workers at the new school by bringing them cool water during breaks. One of the workers, a young man named Vijay, began staying back after hours to help her clean. He had once failed his exams and dropped out, but watching kindness stirred something in him. "Auntie," he said one day, "can I study again?" She looked at him. "Of course, but I am too old." She shook her head. "The tree does not ask when the rain comes. It just drinks when it does." That evening Vijay took out his old books from under his bed. He lit a candle and started reading again. Meanwhile, a storm was brewing elsewhere. One night, Sundar returned to his room in a hotel after a long conference. The window was open. Nothing looked broken, but something felt wrong. On the table, next to his bag, was a second envelope, same paper, same handwriting. This time, it said, "The world loves what it sees, not what it forgets. Dig deeper." He locked the door and called his security contact. They scanned the room. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, but the message was clear. Someone was close. Someone had access. The next day, the story hit social media again. A new post appeared on a private forum. It claimed to have proof of undisclosed information about Sundar's past. The post hinted at a family land dispute from decades ago, a property that was once taken by the government under unclear terms. The post named Lakshmi. It said, "Maybe the woman everyone is praising was not so innocent." The comment section exploded. Some defended her. Others demanded answers. News anchors jumped on the story. Debates began. Opinion pieces were written. Was Sundar's rise built on stolen land? Did Lakshmi hide the truth all these years? Sundar read the articles in silence. He looked at Lakshmi. "Do you know what this is about?" She closed her eyes and nodded. Then she told him a story she had never shared before. "Years ago," she began, "when your father was alive, we owned a small patch of land outside the city. He wanted to build a house there. He had dreams, but we could not afford the legal fees. One day, people came and said the land had been claimed by the government. Your father was angry, but we had no papers. He fought for a while, then he gave up. We never talked about it again." Sundar listened closely. "I did not speak of it because we had already lost everything. What was the use of talking? Was it fair?" Sundar asked. "No," she said, "but we were too weak to fight." He looked at her. "Someone is using that now, twisting it. Let them," she said. "We did not steal. We lost." But Sundar knew the world was not kind to silence. It demanded proof, not peace, so he began investigating. He contacted an old lawyer, searched city records, tracked down papers that had been forgotten in dusty boxes, and then, in one of those boxes, he found the truth. A faded file. Inside it, a letter from a junior officer. The letter stated clearly that the land had been wrongly claimed, but before action could be taken, the officer was transferred. The file was buried. He held the letter in his hands, stunned. His family had been wronged. His father had been right, and no one had known. He posted the letter online with a message. "We did not speak because we believed silence was stronger. Now I speak not to blame, but to remind people truth waits. It does not disappear." The internet exploded again, but this time, in support, people praised his transparency. Others dug into the history of land seizures in the 80s and 90s. Families came forward with similar stories. A movement began. Calls for justice rose. The media changed its tune again. Sundar Pichai clears family name with evidence. Lakshmi Pichai's quiet strength proven once more. But something else happened that no one expected. The same officer who wrote the letter, now retired, came forward. His name was Mr. Menon. He gave a small interview. He said, "I remember the case. I remember the woman's face. She did not beg. She just looked at me and said, 'If it is God's will, let it be taken. We will not curse anyone.'" He paused. "I never forgot those words. They taught me more than any law ever did." Lakshmi saw the interview. She watched quietly, her hands folded in her lap. When it ended, she said softly, "We do not carry anger, we carry memory." But even as peace returned, the final twist was waiting. One evening, as the sun set and the school's roof was being laid, a car stopped outside their house. A man stepped out. He wore a plain shirt and dark glasses. Lakshmi walked to the gate. He removed his glasses. It was Ramesh. He looked thinner, tired, and broken. He bowed his head and said, "Auntie, I came to say sorry." Lakshmi stood silently. Sundar appeared behind her. Ramesh looked up. "I was lost. I was jealous. I thought if I couldn't rise, I should pull others down." His voice cracked. "But the more I tried, the more I saw your strength. I couldn't break it." Lakshmi walked forward and placed a hand on his head. "You are still my son's classmate. That makes you part of our past. And our past should not be bitter." Ramesh broke down and cried. The neighbors watched in silence. Forgiveness had arrived, not in words, but in presence, and with that moment, something powerful closed. But the final chapter was still to come. A moment no one expected. a truth no one had seen yet, and it would take everything Sundar and Lakshmi had built to face it. The early morning sky in Chennai was gray and gentle. A soft drizzle fell from the clouds, brushing the rooftops, as if the sky itself wanted to weep and bless at the same time. Inside the Pichai household, Lakshmi sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. She was watching the street, watching people walk past with umbrellas, children splash in puddles, and a cool breeze pass through the rusted gate. It had been a week since Ramesh came and asked for forgiveness, a week since Lakshmi had placed her hand on his head and returned him to humanity with nothing but grace. The story had touched the entire nation. News channels called it the moment India healed. Social media posts read, "She forgave the man who tried to break her son. That is power." But Sundar had remained quiet. He had grown even more thoughtful since then, walking alone around the half-built school every evening, speaking less, listening more. Something was troubling him, though he had not shared it with anyone, not even Lakshmi. He knew one more truth had to be told, a truth he had buried deep inside, afraid it would break the image of perfection everyone now saw in his mother. But the time had come to face it, not because of pressure, not because of fear, but because of love. That afternoon, he sat beside her. "AMM," he said softly. She turned to him. "Yes, there's something I've never asked you. Something I've always wanted to, but I never found the courage." Lakshmi looked at his face, then asked now. He took a breath. "When Appa died, I was 13. Everyone said it was illness, but I remember the night before he passed away. I heard him yelling outside the house. He was shouting about the land, about losing everything, and the next day, he collapsed." Lakshmi's hands tightened slightly around the cup. Sundar continued, "I've always wondered, did he take his own life?" Lakshmi looked away, her eyes focused on the rain. After a long pause, she said, "Yes." A deep silence filled the room, the kind of silence that hums louder than noise. "But why didn't you tell me?" Sundar asked, his voice trembling. "Because," she said, "you were a boy, and boys should not grow up carrying their father's pain before they're strong enough to carry their own dreams." Sundar was silent. Lakshmi continued, "He was a good man, but when the land was taken, he felt defeated. He believed he had failed us. He was proud, too proud to ask for help. That night, he stood outside and whispered to the sky, 'Forgive me,' and the next morning, he was gone." Tears rolled down Sundar's cheeks. "I would have forgiven him." "I know," Lakshmi said, "but he didn't know how to forgive himself. And you carried that alone." "Yes," she said. "I cried when you were not looking. I screamed into my pillow, but I smiled in front of you, because you needed to believe the world was still good." Sundar reached for her hand. "Amma, how did you survive that?" Lakshmi smiled faintly. "Because you were still there, breathing, dreaming, and because I believed that even if a tree falls, the seed it leaves behind can grow taller than anything the world has seen." Outside, the rain stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds. That moment, Sundar felt something lift from his chest, a weight he had carried unknowingly for decades. The truth did not break him, it made him stronger. The next day, Sundar spoke at a national youth event. The auditorium was packed. Cameras lined every wall, and Lakshmi sat in the front row, wearing a soft blue sari, her eyes filled with quiet pride. Sundar stepped onto the stage. His voice was clear. "Today, I want to tell you about failure. Not mine, but my father's, and how it changed everything." The audience leaned in. "My father took his own life when I was 13. I didn't know the reason then. Now I do. He lost everything we owned. He thought he had nothing more to give, but he was wrong." He looked at Lakshmi, because what he left behind was a woman who refused to let pain win, and a son who grew strong in her shadow. He paused. "I share this not to bring sorrow, but to show you that strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is a woman sewing clothes in silence. Sometimes it is a boy going to school with holes in his shoes, but fire in his mind. The hall broke into applause, and as he stepped down from the stage, the students rose in a standing ovation. But Lakshmi did not clap. She only smiled, because her applause was in her heart, and it had always been there. That evening, they returned home. A small crowd was gathered outside, but this time, they had come with a different purpose. A woman stepped forward holding a small girl's hand. "This is my daughter," she said. "Her father left us, but after seeing your story, I enrolled her in school. I wanted you to know." Lakshmi bent down and touched the girl's head. "Study hard," she said. The girl nodded. More people came forward. A man who had been jobless for years, a young widow, a teenage dropout. Each had a story. Each had found courage in Lakshmi's silence and Sundar's truth. The school's walls rose higher. New windows were added. Children ran through the half-finished halls, laughing. Sundar added a library wing and named it after his father, Venkatakalam Knowledge Center. He said, "This is to honor the man who tried, and the woman who finished what he started." Soon, the school held its first class. Lakshmi walked through the rooms, watching children read, write, dream. She stood in one of the empty rooms and closed her eyes. "Appa," she whispered, "we made it." But the world was still watching. A journalist visited them for a final interview. He asked Lakshmi, "What would you like people to remember you for?" She smiled gently. "I don't want them to remember me. I want them to remember that love and strength are quiet. And sometimes, the person you pass by on the street, the one who says nothing, she may be carrying the future in her arms." The article was published with the headline, "Lakshmi Pichai, the mother who built a future with silence." And on the day the school was officially opened, Prime Minister Modi sent a handwritten letter. It read, "Dear Lakshmi ji, the nation thanks you not just for raising a son, but for showing India what grace looks like. May your light never fade." Lakshmi read the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it beside her husband's photo. Sundar stood beside her. They said nothing, but in that silence, the entire story was written again, not in headlines, not in applause, but in hearts across the world. And that silence, it was louder than anything the world had ever heard. The school was now complete. The gates were painted with the words, "Lakshmi Values School, where dreams begin with dignity." Garden was blooming. Inside the classrooms, desks stood in perfect rows. Blackboards were spotless, waiting to be filled with words of hope. A playground stretched along the back wall, small but full of color. Children laughed under the sun, unaware that they were walking through a living story, one born of struggle, silence, and strength. Lakshmi sat under the shade of a neem tree near the courtyard. Beside her was a bench with a brass plate. It read, "In honor of every mother who chose hope when all seemed lost." Inauguration ceremony was set for the evening. Guests had arrived, politicians, educators, students, families, all gathered in silence, waiting for something greater than speeches. They were waiting to feel something they didn't know how to name, something human, something true. Sundar walked to the stage. He wore a simple white kurta, no fancy suit, no golden badges, just plain fabric, just like the childhood shirt his mother had stitched years ago with trembling fingers and hidden pride. He spoke into the microphone. "This is not a building. This is a promise." The crowd sat still. A promise that no child should be held back because of poverty. A promise that silence, when filled with love, is louder than any noise the world can make. He paused, and this promise was made by a woman who never asked for applause. She simply lived. He turned and gestured toward his mother, who remained seated near the neem tree. People rose to their feet and clapped. Lakshmi raised her hand gently, asking them to stop. The crowd grew quiet. Then she stood up, slowly, gracefully, and walked to the stage. Sundar offered his hand, but she shook her head and climbed the steps herself. She faced the crowd. No notes, no speech in hand. I am not here to teach, she began softly. I am not a leader or a thinker. I am just a mother. Everyone listened. I stitched clothes. I cooked. I cried. I kept going. That is all. The wind stirred her sari, and a few strands of gray hair fell across her face. But today, I speak not for myself. I speak for every mother who could not be here. The one sweeping a floor right now. The one standing at a bus stop in the heat. The one who sold her last ring so her child could buy books. I speak for them. People wiped their eyes. Lakshmi looked at her son. When Sundar was small, he once asked me, Oma, will we always be poor? And I told him, we will never be poor in values. She looked out at the crowd again. Please remember this. Money may open doors, but values build bridges. Thunderous applause broke out, but she stepped back and whispered again, let it be quiet. A hush fell, and in that hush, the message was louder than ever. After the ceremony, guests began to leave. News crews packed their equipment. Some tried to ask for more interviews, but Lakshmi refused. Let the story end, here she said. Let others rise now. But the story did not end. The impact was just beginning. Within a month, 10 similar schools were announced by philanthropists, inspired by her journey. Mothers' circles formed in rural areas to support one another. Sundar launched an initiative to sponsor girls' education across the country. The government started a special honor, called the Lakshmi Medal, to be given every year to unsung mothers who shaped lives through quiet acts of resilience. The award was launched the next year. Lakshmi received the first medal. She held it for a few moments, then placed it in front of her husband's photo, saying, this is ours. Years passed. Sundar continued his work, leading, creating, and giving back. But every few months, no matter how busy he was, he returned to Chennai. He would walk to the school, greet the students, and sit under the neem tree where his mother liked to rest. One such day, as the school celebrated its 5th anniversary, the courtyard was decorated with marigolds. Students performed songs and dances. Sundar was invited to speak again, but he declined. Not today, he said. Today, let them speak. And they did. A young girl read a poem called Ima's Strength. A boy gave a short speech titled, When Silence Speaks. Their words were simple, but their eyes carried dreams that had been planted in soil softened by love and sacrifice. Lakshmi sat quietly, listening. She was older now, thinner, her steps slower, but her eyes, they were still full of light. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the school walls, Lakshmi looked at Sundar and said, I think I'm ready, he asked. Ready for what? To rest? He nodded slowly. You've done everything, he whispered. She smiled. No, you did. I only lit the lamp. Months later, on a cool morning in December, Lakshmi passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was holding a small photograph of Sundar as a boy. There was no pain, only peace. The nation mourned, tributes poured. An state funeral was offered, but Sundar declined. She would want silence, he said, not sirens. The funeral was held in the same yard where she had sewn clothes, cooked meals, and whispered prayers. And as her body was laid to rest, children stood with candles around the school she inspired. No one cried loudly. No one shouted. They just stood in silence. Days later, Sundar shared a final message. It read, My mother left this world the way she lived, humbly. She never asked to be remembered. But we will remember her in every classroom, every book, and every life that was changed by her silence. That message was shared across the world, and somewhere far above the clouds, where neither applause nor headlines can reach, Lakshmi smiled, because she knew her story was not about greatness, it was about goodness, and that kind of story never truly ends.